Uh, all right. Thank you for coming. What we'll be doing today is learning about how we can make computers see, right? And then we'll try to do that by looking at images, right? So that's the first question, right? When you look at this image, what do you see, right? What else? It's an X-ray, right? Right, right. Yeah. You see two eyes, right? But it's a laptop, right? So what is happening here? Like, what do you see when you look at this image? What you're trying to do is technically look at what are all the possible differentiating components of this image. You know that there are some sort of processes over here. There are two fans, and there is some cooling, like whatever is the cooling setup that is present in the laptop that you see over here. And what you're trying to do is basically trying to dissect the image into smaller components, right? Trying to understand what exactly the image looks like. When you look at computer vision, that is all what it is doing as well. It's not doing anything else. What it is trying to do is break down the image into like smaller segments so that it can represent it better, or try to learn the representation of the image and then try to identify what exactly that image is and what are all the objects present in that image, right? So where does the inspiration for computer vision kind of come from, right? So it all starts with eyes and our brains, right? So we know we look through our eyes and then the brain processes this information. So what is happening in terms of brain processing is that in our eyes we have cones and rods, right? So does anyone remember what cones and rods are? Yeah, right. I think rods are for luminance, and then cones are for colors. And the number of cones to rods that we have, it is at a ratio of 1:20, where the number of rods are almost 20 times more than the number of cones. Why? Because we want to identify what exactly is the brightness of the image and then try to perceive at different brightness. So if you look at a well-lit room, what happens is, like you're in a dark room and then you go to a well-lit room, it takes a second for your eyes to adjust into that room and then try to identify what are the objects. But let's say you go from a well-lit room into a dark room, again, the same thing happens where your eye kind of modulates itself and then tries to look at. After like 2 to 3 minutes, you'll be able to identify what are the objects that are present in that dark room as well. So all of this process that you see that happens with our eyes is because of rods, right? And cones are there just to give you kind of like colorful representation of it, of what you're seeing. And how does this happen in our brain, right? So what eyes do is, like, the information is transmitted around the brain, right? And then it tries to, our brain looks at different regions of the objects that we're looking at, processes in different upper layers of the brains, and then the information kind of passes down, right? So that is what you see happening over here as well. So the information is passing from the top layers of the brain and goes into the center and trying to identify what exactly you're looking at. So this is what was kind of figured out. So the identification of how a brain functions, or where is the functionality of the optical processing happening in our brains, was done through two different types of experiments, right? And they involved cat, right? And there was something happening with those cats which was necessary back then but don't happen now. Right? So what was it that they were doing, right? So it is a story. It is called the origin or the story of two missing cats. So let's take cat one to start with, right? And what did the researchers do? they kind of closed the eyes of the cat, displayed some image, right? Opened the covering, and then after they made the cat look at it for a while, and then after that they shut the eyes of the cat. As soon as they shut the eyes of the cat, they beheaded the cat. Before doing all of this, they injected the cat with some kind of a radioactive serum so that they can map what exactly the cat is looking at. Why? Because they wanted to image how eyes perceive information, right? So can you think about how it looked inside the cat's brain? Based on what we discussed earlier, based on this, can you think how it looked on the cat's brain? Yeah, but what was happening there in the brain? Right. So, but that is true. But what exactly was happening was something like this. This is the image that they showed to the cat, right? And this is the radioactive materials deposit that were observed on the brain. What does this show? Whatever you're seeing is actually being imprinted in your brain, right? So this is the object that was being shown, and then this is the object that was seen on your brain, right? And why? Well, we are sorry for the cat, but this helped us understand how exactly brains processes images. It is same for humans. The reason why they did with cat is because there is some sort of similarities in the brains of humans and cats. I don't know the biology behind all of that, but that was the experiment that they did, and this is what they observed. So isn't this fascinating? Like, you think that whatever you're seeing is some sort of information going behind, but technically it's the actual image that is being like imprinted. Whatever you're seeing, I'm seeing you all, and then you're seeing me, and the image is getting printed on our brains, literally, right? So how did they kind of figure out like the cat is looking at different regions? So this is one experiment that they did that helped look at that. Okay, the most initial layers of our brains look at uh, kind of show the image as is, right? But there was another experiment that they did which is the story number 2, where they kind of operated the cat, right? It was made to stay alive, and they kind of injected 2 electrodes into the brain, right? So all of these experiments were done in 1950s and 60s, right? So they didn't have the technology that we have today. Uh, so looking at this experiment, could you tell me what exactly that they were trying to do here? Yeah, that is why the electrodes are there, but why? Why were they doing that?
Determine the cat's response based on the orientation of the stimuli.
Yeah. So what they were doing is they were showing some sort of shape in front of the cat's eyes. And then whenever a particular shape appeared, the electrical signal in the brain kind of increased. But whereas when they showed a shape that was similar to the straight line, it was not as stimulus. The stimulation wasn't great, but it was there. But if they showed a totally different shape, something like this, there was no stimuli at all. What does this show? There are different parts of the brain that are looking at different types of representation of information. So where exactly the electrons were injected, that region, it was able to look at straight lines. But some other part of the brain was processing the horizontal lines or any other line. So all of these, which are about like 8 different types of shapes that they were showing, all of these have different locations where they were being processed. So what does this show, right? Like, our brain is also looking at different parts of the image at different regions and then trying to identify what exactly is being shown in front of us. And then each part of the brain is looking at different information. So what how is this happening? We have neurons that are capturing particular part of information. Our brains are made up of neurons, right? And some bunch of neurons are looking at a particular shape over here and then firing whenever some sort of electrical signals whenever we see a particular shape. And that is happening instantaneously in our brain, right? So with this information on how our human brain works and all of that, or in this case, how the cat's brain works, they kind of developed how we look at that was the principle how they developed cameras as well. Like, well, there is a different history as well, but if we look at cameras, what happens in a camera, right? It also has a particular lens where it looks at the image, right? And then it has a bunch of lenses where if we adjust these lenses, we will be able to look at the picture clearly or not. And we kind of imprint this image in the in some sort of digital format, or in earlier days on film, right? And what, in terms of digital image, how does it look like? The sensors that are present in the camera look somewhat like this, right? So what is each of the sensor? Each of this kind of represents a pixel information. So there are 4 different colors, if you can see closely over here, or 3 different colors in the form of a 2 cross 2 square, right? So there is blue, red, and then 2 greens. Don't ask me why there are 2 greens, right? Because that is how it was designed. But what is this allowing us to do is, but there is a reason why there are 2 greens. Nature has a lot more green compared to reds and blues, right? So using these sensors, they were able to capture the information, and this information is represented as image, and all the information, or all the pixels, or all the sensors that is present over here captures that information and then puts it out as an image, right? So this is how image capturing happens. So what are all the different modalities images are captured in? We have seen RGB, we have seen CMY, we have seen CMYK, we have seen YIQ, HSV, HLS, right? What is this representing?
Different color spaces.
Different color spaces? Yeah, you're saying? Image is not a different wavelengths of light. Image is,
Output, for example, one of them is like infrared. So
there is no infrared here. Like, infrared is one way to capture image for sure, but those are different types of images. But what, if you look at this top image, all of them are representing the same image itself. No, there is no infrared here. So what does all of this represent? Right? So this picture shows that for the same type of image, there are different ways of representing it, right? We can take this image and represent it as a factor of R, G, and B, or we can represent it as a factor of C, M, and Y, right? Or C, M, Y, K. And we have YIQ, and then we have HSV, and we have HLS. So one image has the capability of being represented in multiple formats, right? So what does this mean over here? What is this showing?
each has its own value.
So we can extract information in different formats, right? So when we looked at the first image of the MacBook X-ray, what were we trying to do? We are trying to extract different features of the image, right? Similarly, we were looking at what were all the parts of it, but what could be another way? What are all the plastic materials in it? What are the metal components in it? What are all the sponge or like these kind of components in it, right? So all of these are the ways where we can extract different types of information representation for our image. Or here we are looking at color, but what we could also look at are shapes, right? Like, what is the line? What kind of lines are present over here? If you look at that house that is present, we might see some straight lines, we might see some horizontal lines, we might see some diagonal lines. So all in all, when we look at an image, we start with, while the image is captured in these formats in using multiple modalities that we have, like cameras and all these modalities, there are more ways how we can represent this image. That is what this is trying to show, right? So how can we look at all of these different components, right? So let's look at an example what this means. Let's imagine we want to make biryani or pulao, right? So what all do you need to make this? We need rice, some vegetables, some sort of spices, right? And then you mix them one at a time. You don't put all of them together and then it won't come out as a biryani, right? You need to make it in a specific way, saying that, okay, we need to first roast our spices and then we need to add our veggies, right? Cook it to a certain, for a certain while. And then we add our soaked rice and then we let it steam and then it becomes biryani, right? So what are we doing over here? We are looking at progressively cooking or step-by-step cooking of biryani. Similarly, in images also, we can form the image in the same way as well, right? We can, if you were to draw a house, what would you start with? You would start by drawing lines, right? And then first what you would draw is like, let's say a rectangle, and that rectangle represents a wall. And then you draw multiple such rectangles, and then what does that become? That becomes a house. So here you're seeing how we are building the image, right? We start with some sort of lines, which are edges, right? And then we make it into some part of objects of the house, or here in this case, biryani, right? And then we make it into an object, and then we make it into a scene, which becomes our painting or whatever image that we are capturing. So this is how we draw, right? And what computer vision or how does this look like in terms of brain again? So coming back to brain, how does this information capture happen in terms of brain as well? What we are trying to do? Again, it is pretty much similar over here. What we do is like the outer layer of the brain is looking at all these different edges and variations in the color, which are called gradients. And then there are 4 different types of specific regions in our brain that look at processing this information. So even in our brain, the entire image processing doesn't happen in one go. It takes multiple steps for it to process the image, which starts from the outer layer, goes to this V3A, V3, V2, V1, and then gives us some sort of output, right? So even though our brain is such a complex compute system, it still takes 4 layers, right? So this is how brain functions the image, right? So what happens in terms of our computers? It also does something similar. Or scientists have found a way, in a way that they can represent this information of capturing gradients, right? And then some sort of parts of objects, and then objects, and then trying to represent the entire scene. And then they have figured out a way on doing this on computers as well. So how does this work? So we know that it is looking at some sort of edges, right? So we take our image, which is for a computer, it is in digital format. Let's take an RGB image. What it does is it can be represented like this, right? R, G, and B. It takes that, it processes that information through some sort of processing mechanism, and then it figures out what are all the edges that are present. And then again, we do some sort of processing on the image, and it figures out what are all the contours, gradients, and all of these other representations that are present in the image. Again, we go one more step, continue the processing, and then we figure out what are the different parts of the object. And then finally, we'll be able to say that if the image has a cat, dog, some sort of an animal, or is it a person, or is some sort of vehicle, right? So the same process is has inspired the development of computer vision algorithms, right? So you see that this is a pretty complex process, right? It's if you remember back to how we looked at linear regression, we had just a function where we were looking at y is equal to mx plus b, or even logistic regression where we were looking at a sigmoid function of this y is equal to mx plus b. Do you think it has the capability to represent such complex information? Not by itself, but a bunch of these processing elements together Could it represent this information? Maybe, right? And that is where neural networks come into picture. So what are neural networks? Neural networks are a way of combining such small components together, trying to understand how they function together as a mathematical formulation and then represent them in terms of a neural network, right? All neural networks does is that each neuron is a logistic regression in itself, right? It is a sigmoid function followed by some non-linear followed by a linear implementation, which is y is equal to mx plus b followed by a non-linear activation, right? So how does this look like? Let's try to jump into math a bit. So how many of you know fast Fourier transforms here? Right? This is what a fast Fourier transform is. Kind of, right? So what is happening here? If you look at this representation over here, it is a combination of multiple lines, right? And they're moving in tandem. And this is leading to a representation something like this. If we want to make it more complex, what we can do is something like this, right? And all of this is happening through what? No, it's straight lines. But what is it mapping? I don't know if I can stop it or not. So if you look at each of this, it is because a straight line is traversing in some direction, that's all right? So yeah, rotating in some direction, and that is what is leading to this figure. So it is a function of that straight line, which is a non-linear, becomes a circle, and that kind of leads to the shape. And that is what the kind of information neural networks are also trying to capture. So what are neural networks trying to do? It is trying to look at these kind of straight lines. What is the best way it can get these straight lines? And then what is a non-linear function it can apply on top of them so that it can represent such an information together, right? But all of this, so you might have heard that like in the last lecture that we looked at in getting started with neural networks or deep learning, we had linear layers. What are linear layers? It is a bunch of these logistic functions together, connected all together, right? And then trying to give some output. Do you think that it could work in a computer vision setting? So what it was doing is basically this, right? So we had let's say we have a square information. What we are doing is like flattening it out and then saying that these are our weight matrices, and then we combine it with all the values that were present there. Do you think this would work in complex images? Why wouldn't it work? Okay, even if you add more layers, do you think it would still work? It will work for small images, but let's say you go for very complex images. So it is why it will work, not saying it won't work. But do you think it will be able to identify exactly with really high confidence saying that, okay, what is the object over here? What is it, this cube representing? It is representing a straight line, right? So when I spread it out, what is happening here? Do you know, is it a straight line or a horizontal line? Or it could be a diagonal line, right? So what is happening there? It is losing the spatial information of the image. So while it works, it might not give out the best possible answers that we want, right? So that is why researchers came up with a technique called convolutional neural networks. So what are CNNs, right? So basically, instead of capturing these information by separating all of these pixels into a linear representation, what they did was they were looking at multiplying these values in some sort of convolutional approach. So what is convolution over here? So can you tell me what is happening in this picture? No, it is very simple. No, It is even more simpler than that. It is doing that. How is it doing that? Well, when you say reducing dimensions, sure, but it is because it is doing something. That is why the image is becoming from 4 cross 4 to 2 cross 2. It's very simple. So what you're seeing a dark patch over here that is moving across the image. Each of this dark patch is represented by a value, right? And what is happening there is it is multiplying. So let's say this square comes over here, right? And what is happening there is it is multiplying those two values together, and then it does the same way for all the 9 pixels and adds it up together. That is all it is doing, right? Well, there is much more information. Like, take all of this information with a grain of salt, because we are getting started with understanding how computer vision works. It becomes more complex as we go ahead into the sessions. But technically, that is what it is doing. It is taking this information and then multiplying it and getting all the 9 values multiplied, and then it adds it up. And then that information is represented as one green pixel, right? This process is called convolutions in computer vision. As simple as that, right? So how does actually this work? Let's look at an example of it as well. Let's take this 5 cross 5 image, right? And then we have a kernel which is of this value, which is 0, 1, 2, 2, 2, 0, 0, 1, 2 again. So what is happening here is that the 0 gets multiplied with this. So let's take a minute, and then can you try and figure out if by doing convolution on this image with this kernel, do you get this value or not? So you've all understood how exactly convolutions work, right? So what it is doing is it multiplies 0 with 3, 1 with 3, 2 with 2, and then 2 with 0, 2 with 0, and 0 with 1. And then same way it repeats to this 3 line, like these 3 values in a 3 cross 3 square, and then add it together. That is where we are going to go ahead. No, you're good. Just try for 1 or 2. You don't have to try for all. It does add up, right? And that is all convolutions are doing. So we looked at a 4 cross 4 image over here, where we start with, right? And then what happens in a 5 cross 5? We are not, right? Information, we are not losing information. We are doing some sort of information aggregation over here. What are we trying to do? With some sort of a kernel function. So this dark purple patch that is moving on the image, it is called a kernel, right? And then what this kernel is doing, it is trying to extract relevant information from the light purple image, and then trying to do some sort of a computation and represent it as the green output. So here we are not losing information, we are extracting whatever information is necessary. Right? Losing information is if this multiplication does not happen, if that pixel value is ignored altogether. Right? That is what represents losing information. But here we are doing some sort of computation with all the information that is present, which is 25 values in that 5 cross 5 square. And then we multiply it with a 3 cross 3 kernel, and then it results in a 3 cross 3 output. Right? So do you see some pattern over here? Like, compare this slide where a convolution is happening on a 5 cross 5 versus this one where a convolution is happening on 4 cross 4. Do you see some sort of resemblance on what is happening here? Sure. Yeah, that is how convolutions work, right? But what more do you see over here? Yes. Okay. There is something more that's happening. So when I say something more, you look at this one and you look at this one, something similar is happening between the two. By how much is the pixel reduction happening? Or by what ratio is the information being aggregated into? Yeah. So can you represent this in some sort of math format? It's simple linear equation. It's simple arithmetic that we're looking at. You don't have to complicate it thinking about some sort of linear algebra or anything. What is happening over here is that you start with a 4x4 image. You do a convolution with a 3x3. It results in a 2x2. Right? You do a convolution on a 5x5 image with a 3x3 kernel. It results in what? A 3x3 image. So irrespective of the image size, if you convolve with a 3x3 kernel, what happens? N minus 2. Right? So that is what is happening. That is kind of how the information is getting aggregated. So what is happening here? So each pixel in the green output that you see represents how much information here. So each pixel over here represents the information from this 3x3 region, right? Similarly, the next one represents the next 3x3. Similarly, the one after that represents the next 3x3. So if I look at one pixel output over there, right, how much information does it represent from the input data? 9 pixels, which is a 3x3. This information representation that is captured through convolution is called a receptive field. Right? We'll look at receptive field in more detail, right? And so now what are we doing over here? We are convolving on this image once by using how many kernels? One kernel, right? What would happen if we were to do that twice? Yeah? Why is it smaller? Yeah. But what is this one pixel representing? How much information is this representing? Why do you think it's 25 pixel? Yeah, exactly. So this is what convolutions is like in a convolutional neural network. This is what is happening, right? So the kernel is doing some sort of convolution on this 5x5 image, right? It is getting the output of what? A 3x3 output. Again, you take the same, like another 3x3 kernel, and then you multiply on the 3x3 output, it results in a 1x1 image. So the convolution of the process of convolution on the image twice would result in capturing the entire image when the image size is 5x5 and the kernel size is 3x3. Can I do this in one step? Yeah? Yeah. It gives you like output is some sort of changes will be there, but you can still convolve a 5x5 image with a 5x5 kernel, right? But why are the images showing 3x3? It is because NVIDIA has made computation of 3x3 kernels extremely cheap. That is why we stick with 3x3. Yeah, it started there, right? And also, if you look at the number of operations that are happening, doing 3x3 twice leads to lesser number of operations compared to doing a 5x5 convolution. And also, based on that information, NVIDIA optimized on top of that. So 3x3 becomes even more faster than what it is already like. It's already fast and they made it even faster, basically. So how does, now what are we looking at? We are looking at an image of 5x5. But what are the actual image sizes? 1024 by 1024, right? Or such huge images. If we look at such images, what would happen is that we look at this kernel extraction step by step. We start with edges, right? And then we go to parts of objects, and then we look at identifying the objects. Right? So when we look at this, so we look at how exactly this happens, and then how do we extract these features. But once the model is trained, what would a 3x3 kernel look like? Right? It would look something like this. Let's say we have trained our 3x3 kernels, and then once it is trained, these are all the features that it is extracting. Does this represent anything? Can we physically, or looking at it, can we understand what exactly it is extracting? No, right? So let's increase it to 5x5. This is what it looks like. Can you still make out something from this image? No. Right? What about 7x7? Something is visible, but it is still not very clear over here. You can see some sort of difference in gradients over here, like it is trying to identify darker gradient over here, and then it's lighter over here. But it is still not very clear, right? But what about at 11x11? So at 11x11, the combination of kernels information that we are capturing has a capability of figuring out edges like this. So what you're looking at is, if you zoom into this image, or I think if I look closely, there are 11 pixels over here if we count. I think this is a good image. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah. So at 11x11 kernel size, we can get really good features or low-level features, which is what we want to start with, right? So this is the principle of how the extraction happens, right? So we start with 3x3, we do convolution once, and then we get that output on the image, and then we do another 3x3 on top of that, we get a 5x5 output. Basically a 5x5 image representation. If we do again, we get a 7x7. If we do again, we get a 9x9, and then if we do again, we get 11x11. So how many times do we convolve over here? 5 times on the image to get 11x11 output, or a feature extraction of 11x11, right? So if we were to do this for a longer period of time, how would the features look like? Right? So we know that we can understand feature extraction at 4 different stages: edges and gradients, right? And then some sort of parts of objects, and then objects. All of this can be looked at in this representation over here. How does convolution work, or the convolution neural network work, is that it starts by extracting this first, and then that information gets combined into such a representation, which is capturing textures and patterns, right? And then we'll go ahead, we continue the convolutions. We are looking at parts of objects, and then finally we are looking at objects over here, right? So if you look at this image, can you see or can you guess what exactly it was extracting? It is extracting a building, but this one. How, how does it look like dogs? Yeah. So this one is dogs for sure. But that is not dogs. Well, I do understand where you're coming from, but it is technically looking at some sort of building structure. Yeah. That is what it is extracting. It is extracting Leaning Tower of Pisa, right? And then you can look at this image, and can you guess what is this? Legs, pants, right? Hands, basically different parts of a human body. right? And what about this? Right? And what about this one? God knows what it is looking at. And some sort of nature, right? So you see how it progresses from such low level features, which are looking at edges and gradients, like gradients because there is color gradient that is present. It moves on to identifying some sort of patterns over here, or textures and patterns. And then we look at parts of objects, and then we have objects that we can extract. Right? And what is doing all of this? Just those 3x3 kernels. And we have bunch of them to do this. Right? So with this understanding of how the extraction happens, right? So let's actually see how convolutions happen, right? So we know that an image has RGB channel, right? How does convolution happen? It looks something like this. Just take a minute and then go over this uh, visual, whatever, GIF, and then think what is happening over here for a second. It'll keep repeating. Take a minute, think about it, and then we'll discuss about it. Okay? Okay? I wish I could stop this. Let me see. Oh, sorry. So, okay. Okay, it didn't come up. Okay, I think I got it now. So look at this, right? And then can you think about what is happening over here? It's a sliding filter, sure. Okay. Okay. But if you look at the output, we were getting like 4 outputs, right? Why are we getting 4 outputs there? Let me present that as well, and then we can look at it. Yeah. So if you think about this, what is happening over here is, what does the image have? Image has RGB channels, right? What does convolution give us? It should give us one exact output, right? So our kernel is not just a 3x3, it is 3x3x3. So what is happening is each of the RGB channel has its counterpart in the kernels. So each kernel has a kernel for the R channel and a B channel and a G channel. What it is doing is it is taking this over here. So if you look at this image closely, even in the kernel, there is R, G, and B, right? So the red value is getting multiplied with the red values from the image, blue with blue, green with green, and then it is adding up all of these values, and then you're getting this final 3x3 one channel output. It is some sort of abstraction of the image. So once the convolution happens, we don't know what exactly the image is representing technically, or what the output is representing. It is some sort of feature extracted output, right? So this is how convolutions work. So if we have an image of 32x32x3, we start with a kernel of 3x3x3, and then it would result in an output of what would be the output of this convolution? So we have the image 32 cross 32 cross 3, right? And then our kernel is 3 cross 3 cross 3. What would be the output? Yeah, 32. Yeah, yeah. It's 30 cross 30 cross 1. Is that clear for everyone how it is happening? Okay, so do you see this? Ignore rest of the things, right? This is one kernel, right? Whatever you're seeing over here, right? What it is happening is it is taking each channel wise, right? So there is red channel, there is green channel, and there is blue channel. Similarly, our kernel also has red channel, green channel, and blue channel. All of these values are getting multiplied and they're getting added. It is resulting in a 3 cross 3 cross 1 output. What is the input image size? It is 5 cross 5 cross 3. What is our kernel size? Kernel is 3 cross 3 cross 3. What is the output? It is 3 cross 3 cross 1. Right? Take this. Do you understand how the computation? Yeah. Why? Because we looked at multiplication in 2 dimensions there, where we had just one image. If we go back to this one, if we look at this, here we have just one channel here, which is just a purple channel. And then our kernel is also a purple channel. What is our channel dimensions here? If we add depth to the channel, it is 1, right? Our image is 5 cross 5 cross 1 over here, and our kernel is 3 cross 3 cross 1. It is resulting in 3 cross 3 cross 1. If we expand this depth-wise. That is why it might be hard to visually think about what exactly is happening. But what is happening is basically this. Let me close this one because this is not important anymore. So we have the input channel, which is red. We have the kernel channel, which is also associated with red. We have the green channel and the kernel also for the green channel, similarly for the blue channel. So what is happening is we take this and then multiply with all the values. Similarly, we take the green channel and multiply with all the values, blue channel or blue kernel, and multiply with the input blue channel. And what does this result in is output for individual convolution operations. You add that all of them up together, and then it results in this output.
That's the code one and the
No, the 4 is different. So here, what are we looking at is operation on the image with just one kernel. One kernel, right? What if we do with 4 kernels? We'll have 4 such outputs. And that is what was being represented here. Right? So what is happening here? Just think about it, look at it. We start with 4, the image is same, but we have 4 different kernels. One, second kernel, third kernel, and then the 4th kernel. Right. So what can you think about the math that is happening over here in terms of convolutions? Can anyone explain me how can we represent this in terms of matrix representation? So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you're asking? Yeah, 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 yeah. So this is tensor operation that is happening, right? So how can you represent this mathematically? We know that with just for one image, what we have is 5 cross 5 cross 3, which is the image. Our channel is 3 cross 3 cross 3, and then we get a 3 cross 3 cross 1 output. Is everyone okay with these numbers? Right? Let's say we have 4 kernels now. How can you represent this now? I don't have the board to write. If not, I would have written it down. No. So we are doing whatever the initial operation with one channel or one kernel. If you want to do it with 4 kernels, what would happen? Yeah, you're on the right track. There is no into 1. No. You are almost close. You're almost there.
Yeah.
No. So input is going to remain the same, right? Because we are not changing the input at all, right? What we are doing is changing the number of kernels. What is our kernel size? 3 cross 3 cross 3. How many of them do we want? 4. So we have 4 such. How can we represent that? Times 4. So it would be 3 cross 3 cross 3 cross 4, right? And then what would our output be? Output would be 3 cross 3 cross 1 cross 4. Okay.
For one time.
So, okay, this is good. So what we are doing is we have an image of 5 cross 5 cross 3. And then we have a kernel of 3 cross 3 cross 3. What does this result in? 3 cross 3 cross 1.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to do it with 4 channels, what would happen? All we have to do is this times 4. And then what would be the resultant? Times 4. That's it. This is a convolutional operation. Now, I'll give you a problem that I want you to think about and give me the answer. Image size, yeah. What? No, it is 3 cross 3. It is n minus 2. It is not n minus 3. 5 minus 2 is 3. Right? So now take an image of size 32 cross 32 cross 3, and then you're convolving with 32 channels or 32 kernels. Right? You have 32 cross 32 cross 3 is the input size, and then kernel, whatever it is, we have 32 of them. What would be the output? Kernel is still 3 cross 3 cross 3. Why did you think it's 29? No, like, okay. Okay, so the output is going to be what? Into 32. Now, this is one operation, right? N minus 2. Input size is n. This is n minus 2. Right? And now this is one layer of operations. But remember, how many times we had to do the 3 cross 3 convolutions to get to a understandable feature extractor? 11 cross 11? Because we had to do the convolution 5 times in order to get some sort of feature that we can understand, right? So if we want to do this operation 5 times, what can we represent this as? So if here we added an extra dimension over here, right? Like initially we had started with 3-dimensional values. We computed with 3-dimensional values still, but we are getting what? Here 4-dimensional output. Can we make this into a 3-dimensional value so that we can continue doing the same operation? We can just get rid of this one. Right? Is this clear why we did that? Yeah, we are basically reducing that dimension, and then instead of having one stacking over 32 times, we just stack it 32 times. Doesn't make a difference mathematically, right? Yes, it does. Because we are reducing a dimension there, and that reduces the complexity of compute required. That is why this makes sense. But in terms of values, it doesn't make a lot of changes. Like what it is representing will not vary. But the number of computations that we'll have to do if we go with this will be lower. So now take this, right? And then imagine you're doing convolutions with 64 kernels. What would the output be? Yeah, on top of this. First, what would be the kernel size? So we have simplified the output dimensions now. It is 30 cross 30 cross 32. Now we want to do the same operation with 64 kernels. Right? Basically, what is happening here is that we take individual pixels from this, multiply, and then add. Multiply and then add. We get one value like that, right? Similarly, what needs to happen here for that? The kernel size won't change, right? It should be 3 cross 3, but so if you remember, we had RGB channel from the image, and then our kernel also had RGB channel so that it could multiply the same way. Here, what should happen? 32. Why 32? Exactly. Because there are 32 channels that is present in our output from the first convolution, because multiplication is happening pixel-wise, right? We need 32 of them in our kernel. And then what would be the output? It would be 28 cross 28 cross. Simplified, 64. Let's look at this again, right? If we look at this image again, I think that will make more sense now. Let me try to. Is this okay for everyone, or do you want me to pull the screen down? Okay. So you're looking at multiplication over here, where one is getting multiplied with that 0 with the red channel, right? Each value is getting multiplied, and then you're getting that 148 value over there, right? Or whatever it's changing there. But similarly, you're doing it for the green channel as well, and similarly, you're doing it for the blue channel as well. If the number of channel increase, similarly, shouldn't the multiplication with the number of kernels also increase? Right? That is why we need to have a 32 cross, a 3 cross 3 cross 32 kernel, so that we can do a similar operation and then add it up all together. Isn't this interesting? Right? So here, what are we looking at? How is the channel moving, or rather, how is the kernel moving on the image? How many pixels is it shifting by? Right? This is called convolution with a stride of 1. Stride represents how much shift is happening. What would happen if we had a stride of 2? What do you think would be the output then? Do you have pen and paper? I think if you do have pen and paper, just take it out and try to do this. If you have, if not, think about it. So you understood what stride is equal to 1 means, right? Okay. So here, how is the kernel shifting from on the image? it is shifting by 1 pixel at a time, right? So similarly, if you were to shift the pixel by 2 times, what would be the output? Take an image of 5 cross 5 and then try to do that. This is a 5 cross 5, right? Take this one and then think what would be the strided convolution of 2 would look like. Which stride of 2? It was a 3 by 3 kernel. Yeah. Is that clear? Let's look at how does it actually look like? It would look something like this. Let me pull the screen down. So what is happening here is that we have a 7 cross 7 image, right? And then we are convolving with a 3 cross 3 kernel with a stride of 2, right? And then we are getting a feature map of 3 cross 3. We are not considering depth here because we understand how the depth functions. Or do you want to do an example with depth as well for this? Take a 7 cross 7 cross 3 or 7 cross 7 cross 32 and then convolve with 64 channels, 64 kernels, and then what would be the output? With the stride of 2, sorry. Yeah. I'll reiterate the problem. 7 cross 7 cross 32 is the input data, right? We need to use 64 kernels. What would be the output with a stride of 2? You have stride of 1 solution already, like stride of 2 solution already here. It should be pretty easy to give me that answer. Yeah. Is it clear for everyone how exactly this is functioning? Don't try to convert it into math, right? So the moment you try to formalize it, it becomes very hard to like represent it or try to compute it. It's very intuitive. The moment you try to formalize it, it becomes very hard to understand what is happening. So how many number of channels do we need in our kernels to multiply? Same as the number of input channels, right? How many features do we want to extract is the number of kernels. So each kernel is extracting one type of representation, right? It is either looking at a horizontal edge or a vertical edge or a diagonal edge or some sort of a different type of edge. That is what a 3 cross 3 is doing, right? When you have this feature extractor, you want to get 64 such feature extractions. What do? You multiply with the kernel of 3 cross 3 cross 32 64 times. And then what would that result in? It would result in a 3 cross 3 cross 64 outputs. The output is 3 cross 3 cross 1, and we get 64 such outputs. But just to make it simplified for future convolutions, we remove the 1 dimension. The one with stride. So what is stride? Stride is doing skipping by 2 pixels, right? Stride is equal to 1 is skipping by 1 pixel or moving pixel by pixel. But stride is equal to 2 is skipping 1 pixel. That is n minus 4.
I have the slide better or over the slide, but over is better, right?
So there are multiple reasons where you might use strides, and there are multiple locations where you might not use strides. This is not part of the slide deck, but I just want to give you this intuition so that you can think about it. So what is stride doing is we are losing some sort of information representation. So let me see if I have that image so that I can show you. Yeah, I found it. So we know how 3 x 3 with stride of 1 would move, right? So I think this is a really good image to look at. So what is happening here is this is the cone is representing our kernel size. So what would happen here is that if we were moving with a stride of 1, it would move from this position to this position, and then it would go on. So how would it look like is that the number of information represented in each pixel would be overlapped, right? And it is continuous. There is a way to calculate that, but I won't go into that. That becomes more complicated, right? But when we have a stride of 1, what is missing is some sort of information capture that gets missed, right? There are points where this is okay, but there might be points where this is not okay. So I leave it at that because I don't want to go deeper into that because it becomes more convoluted as I go deeper into that. But it is about how much information are you okay losing compared by increasing the strides. You lose information representation. You might not capture all the necessary information. So what is this happening? Here you're looking at how many times is this pixel captured? How many times this pixel is captured? Twice, right? What are you looking at? You're looking at some sort of stepwise loss when you have more strides. So what would that lead to is a checkerboard issue of sorts. So this is what happens when you do strided convolutions, right? So if you look at this, when you do convolution with continued values, you see clear edge separation, right? But the moment you increase the stride, it becomes something like this. We are losing details over there. Because if you look at this pixel, the first one is captured once, next is once again, and then after that it's twice. And whatever was twice, technically what do you expect? The next one to increase, but it drops to 1. The number of times it is captured, right? So it is like it steps and then comes down, again increases the step, how many times the pixel is looked at, and then again comes down. So this, because of this, what happens is that the information that is represented for particular center level features, like in the image, the corner features might not be that important, but whatever is present at the center might be the most important information, right? So we want to look at that information multiple times. But if we increase stride, that is not going to happen. We are looking at it less number of times compared to stride is equal to 1. There are scenarios where that is okay. There are scenarios where that is not okay. So it is again a decision that is upon the developer to look at if you can go with it or if you can't go with it. You do. Computation cost, you do. But again, those are the scenarios where you have to consider. Okay, jumping back into the slides now. Let me close this. So why convolution? Like, we have seen that we are doing convolutions and all of that. We know what exactly this is like, what these kernels are extracting. These kernels are extracting some sort of features, like either a horizontal edge or a vertical edge or a diagonal edge. But why CNNs? So sorry, that is linear layer, right? We can design our own kernels, something like this. What is happening over here is that we have an image of a house, and then if we pass it through a horizontal kernel, we might get edges like this. And we have vertical ones, we pass it, and then we get just vertical. And then we get diagonals, and then varying diagonals, right? It's up to you. Infinite. No, even if you take a 3 cross 3, I can have a 4 here or I can have a 10 here, right? So how many numbers can you think about? Those many kernels you can design, right? Yeah. I think that is a great way to put it. What are the possible number of 3 cross 3 matrices can you have, right? How many can you feasibly design? All of these are handcrafted kernels, right? I am saying that, okay, the first row should be -1s, next one should be 2s, and then after that it's -1s. That is extracting just horizontal edges. So if we want to use these kind of kernels or design these kind of kernels to detect what exact object is present in our image, how many kernels do you think that we would have to look at designing? Like, because all of these are being handcrafted, right? How do you know it's 360? Okay. Why 4? I do this. What about that? Exactly. That is why we need CNNs. He's saying that he's looking at just 4 different representation, but no. He's saying just 4 kernels.
Then he said you can't do that in 3 by 3. You can definitely put even like you can do a 2.3, like 0.2345 degree even in a 3 cross 3.
You can design it to do a lot of things. How? That is what computer vision engineers were doing earlier, right? But to what extent can you keep doing that for every new problem? Like, let's say you want to detect a dog today on an image, right? And you design all the kernels that you need to detect a dog. And then tomorrow you want to detect a cat. Do you think you can use the same kernels to detect a dog, the same kernels that you designed to detect a dog, to detect a cat?
Well, the kernel is not designed exactly for a dog. Like they are designed for like variation,
Okay.
curved edges and stuff like that.
Okay.
Like you can.
Okay.
Question got lost then. I don't think the right question is can you use those kernels? I think the first question is if you want to figure out your dog, even if you design as many kernels as you like, you have to also define a procedure and how to use them to define in computer language what is a dog.
Yeah.
So it's not just about what the kernel is about, how to use them. And so even if you're still thinking about human to think about angles, contours, lines, but unless you define the procedure on how to use them, you don't even know what are the kernels you want to design.
Right. So it becomes, and also if you look at these images in different brightness settings, right? Again, for the same image, let's say you have one image and then you change the brightness of these pixels by a few values, it will not work. Whatever we have handcrafted, those kernels will not work. Yeah. We have to redesign again. Yes. So with so many variable components involved in kernel design, that is why CNNs became very popular. Anything you make one pixel, if you modify one pixel value, it would fail. Like the kernel extraction would fail. Right? So that is where like CNNs became very popular. Right? What do CNNs do? They are looking at a bunch of these kernels together, right? And then trying to combine the information that all of these kernels are representing and then trying to present it to us. So if you look at this feature map that we looked at, which was the 11 cross 11 feature map, let's jump back into these feature maps a bit, right? So this is a 3 cross 3 feature map that our CNN extract. Do you think you could have come up with something like this? right? Similarly, let's look at a 5 cross 5. Do you think you could have come up with something like this? Right? So you have values ranging from 0 to 255. And how many values are there for 5 cross 5? 25 values. That is 255 to the power of 25 possible combinations you can design this kernel just for 5 cross 5. Right? Yeah. So what do CNNs do? Because we understand the principle of back propagation and then we understand how forward propagation works, we can start with some random values of these kernels and then make sure that there is some sort of generalizations these kernel can capture. Right? Again, in CNNs, what happens is that, let's say we have around some 10,000 kernels that are there, for example, and that value is still less, right? So what happens there is that we are looking at a particular, like around 100 to 200 kernels looking at some sort of feature, another 100 to 200 looking at another sort of feature. So all the kernels will not fire for all the features. Particular kernels will fire for particular features. And that is what gives us what is a different object that is present. And then because we are doing this multiple times, just to extract a feature map of 11 cross 11, we convolve 5 times. Imagine doing this 100 times, 200 times. You're looking at different level of feature extraction, right? So with this, like this much amount of feature extraction, all of these kernels get trained to identify particular types of features, right? So that is why CNNs work to a certain degree, with a caveat always. So now we have understood how exactly CNNs work, how convolutions happen. Let's recap what receptive field is, right? Receptive field is the amount of information each pixel is looking at from its immediate neighbor. That is called a local receptive field. So the receptive field of each of this pixel from this image is what? Each pixel in the yellow output that is there, which is a 3 cross 3 output. What is the receptive field of each pixel there? 3 cross 3, because it is looking at a 3 cross 3 grid over here. What would be the receptive field of this with respect to yellow? 3 cross 3. So can we say that the local receptive field, that is the information that is being propagated from one layer to the next, is 3 cross 3? It is not constant. It depends on your kernel size, right? But what is the global receptive field of this from the input to the final layer, 5 cross 5? So do you see a difference between local receptive and global receptive field here? Yeah, yeah, yes. Global is usually the size of the image. Again with the star, right? Because as we look at more complex neural network architectures, it can go up to 1,000 cross 1,000 as well for an image of 3 cross 3. But let's not go into that. Let's just understand this, right? So the global receptive field of this 5 cross 5 image would be the entire size of the image itself, which is 5 cross 5, right? And then the local receptive field of these pixels would be 3 cross 3, and the local receptive field of the green pixel would also be 3 cross 3. But the global receptive field of the green pixel would be 5 cross 5. What would be the global receptive field of each pixel in the yellow grid? Imagine this does not exist. What would be the global receptive field then? Each pixel. I'm not asking about the entire grid. 3 cross 3. Right? So I hope this kind of exercise gave you an understanding of what exactly is a global receptive field and what exactly is a local receptive field and how we can compute it. Cool. So let's look at how can we convolve over an image of 400 cross 400. Right? We have a 400 cross 400 cross 3 image. We convolve with a 32, 3 cross 3 cross 3 cross 32. This is the output that we get. What is the receptive field? 3 here, right? And then we continue the process till 390 cross 390. What is the receptive field that we have reached? So from our understanding of looking at the image, when can we identify the object that is present in an image, given the object size is same as the image size? So let's say our object, we are looking to identify a dog in our picture, and the size of the dog is 400 cross 400, and that is the size of our image. What should be the receptive field to identify this dog? Okay, what does receptive field represent? Information that is present in that neighboring pixel, but you're defining local receptive field. Going ahead, whenever I say receptive field, think global receptive field, right? So when can we say that an object is present in this image? What should be the receptive field then? Like, let's say our dog's photo size is 400 cross 400. That is the entire dog image size. What should be the receptive field to say that there is a dog here? 400 cross 400. Here, how many layers have we implemented? 5. How many layers should we implement to go to 400 cross 400 receptive field? Give me a number. No? 199, right? We have to add 199 layers to say that we reach the receptive field of 400 cross 400. How many layers is that? 199 layers. And not always it is feasible to have so many layers there. So is there a way where we can reduce the number of layers? Do you see the complexity here? The computational complexity or the computational challenge of this, right? Do you think that we need to reduce the number of layers? Everyone on the same page? How can we reduce the number of layers now? But our convolution is already doing that. Because if you think about any neuron function, it is nonlinearity of a linear function, which is sigmoid of y is equal to mx plus b.
That conflict between what CNN on the wall to kind of use that propagation.
So you're coming from a global perspective of what CNNs do, like how the CNN architectures work. But CNNs, we have not looked at everything that is part of that architectures that give you that capability.
The interpretation of the CNN is wrong. Like the point of learning kernels and figuring out if there's a dog in the picture or not has got nothing to do with localizing where the dog in the image is. That's not what I said. Talking about you want to reach the final classification where the dog in the image. That's what you use hundreds or whatever epochs of on CNN is that propagation to adjust the activation function. There's the kind of stuff. Right. You just need the 199 there. Right,
but there are go ahead. So there are a lot of implementations that are missing there, right? If you imagine, just take CNN layers, go home and try to do this exercise, right? Have just, let's say, 18 layers, and then have the image sizes of, let's say, take a 32 cross 32 image. CIFAR dataset is a good example for that, right? Just have 5 layers. Do you think that convolutional neural network that you have designed with just CNN layers will have the capability to decide what is the class of that image?
Larger picture that point I was looking at. Learning what the optimal function is one point, but when you reach the dense layers part of a CNN, like I think you already explained that part, right? Dense layers coming into the
Yeah.
You still kind of want each dense layer to have like a representation of the entire input image to learn from. That's where the receptive field comes in. What you're learning over multiple epochs has got nothing, will not help if the image cannot even see picture denser can't even see the entire image. That's kind of the point. Learning more is about learning a better function. The receptive feed is about what is the good input to that function you're learning.
Is it clear or is it still confusing? No, if it's still confusing, we can discuss about it. Cool. Okay. So with if you have to go to like in this example, if you stick with this example, right? You have to go to 199 layers technically with just convolutions. We are not looking at anything beyond convolutions right now, right? So it's not feasible because what would happen here is like the number of computational or the kernels that we are adding. Even if we go with 32 kernels all the time, we are at 32 times 199, whatever the number that is there, those many kernels that are present. We can, well, that does work, but there is a better way of reducing the number of layers and go to that stage much faster, right? And that is called max pooling, right? So what does max pooling do? It looks at the image, right? Whatever the, we are looking at a 3x3 max pool layer over here, looks at the most informative information or pixel value that is there, captures that, and then forward propagates it. How do you think is happening here? So if you look at this, what do you think is happening here? No, it is not. Believe me, it is not. So if you look at image, each of them are pixel values. What are pixel values? Numbers. What are you multiplying it with? Kernel. What does kernels have? Still numbers. When you multiply with numbers, you still get numbers as outputs, right? So this is what that is representing. It might not be integer values. It can be floating values as well.
Pixel density is basically the color, right?
No, you're going into a totally different domain there. So pixel density is not what we are looking at here. We are looking at what is the value of the pixel. Even when we are doing convolution operations, we are looking at the value of the pixel, not the pixel density. Value of a pixel is like a value that is ranging between 0 to 255. That's all. If you take an image, RGB image, right? It has 3 channels. Each channel has, let's say, if the image size is 32 cross 32, there are 32 cross 32 pixels in each channel. Each pixel over there ranges from a value of 0 to 255. That is what is the value of a pixel. If you go and then look at, there are multiple libraries. I think Pillow is one such library. You can use that and then look at all the pixel values that are present in an image just by reading that image and then printing that value, right? I would recommend that you go and try this exercise out, and then that becomes more clear what exactly pixel values look like.
Okay. Then the pixel value is basically color intensity.
No,
Not even that.
no.
Yeah.
So what is representing color there?
The shade of color.
No. It is the combination of the R, the G, and the B is what is giving you some sort of color perspective. That is all, right? There is no, like, what you are saying. Can you repeat your question again? Sorry, I lost it in my train of thought.
In atoms, like what the value is, like what